the Indian Upanishads, and the discovery of the unconscious. In 7th century BC India, a number of forest philosophers produced a series of texts of extraordinary genius. These texts are called the Upanishads, and they developed what became the Eastern spiritual quest, the highest goal in all of Eastern philosophy. Their writers, the so-called renouncers, had departed to the forest to spend time contemplating the mind. There they ventured deep into a field of inquiry that other early civilizations never even explored. And remarkably, they managed to formulate a rudimentary conception of what we would now call the unconscious. For they recognized that our thoughts and feelings, when observed up close, seemed to appear out of nothing and then disappear again. It seemed that there was a thinker behind the scenes who produces our thoughts, yet we, quote, cannot think of the thinker who does the thinking. Impressed by this discovery, they then identified this invisible and unknowable thinker with the self or Atman, and they recognized this Atman as the ultimate being of the universe, greater even than the gods. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself. Let's start. Around 800 BC, urbanization returned to India, which had disappeared since the collapse of the Indus civilization. As a result of this reboot of city life, the economy grew, giving a part of the population enough leisure time to engage in philosophical debate, and also to travel long distances to seek out the great teachers of the day. And from the 7th century BC, these developments caused a revolutionary turn in Hinduism. For whereas earlier Hinduism was focused mostly on communal rituals for the common good of society, now a number of philosophers, known as the renouncers, quote, departed into the forest to investigate the inner world. The old Vedic ritual sacrifices remained important, but they were now often given new meanings. For instance, it was now claimed that the true sacrifice should not be offered externally, but, quote, offered internally, for the purpose of seeking the self or Atman. Many of these forest philosophers deliberately left their house, their family and their possessions, becoming wandering ascetics. In this way, they believed, they could investigate the mind, undistracted by sensual pleasures and also by the mundane life of the family. We read about this. It is when they come to know this self that Brahmins or priests give up the desire for sons, the desire for wealth, and the desire for worlds, and undertake the mendicant or beggar's life. And these renouncers became the ideal of India's spiritual quest. In practice, however, we have to say, not all philosophers actually lived in the forest. For the text also mentions some philosophers who were married, and even some who were the personal philosophers of kings. And there were even a few renowned philosophers who were not from the Brahmin caste at all, that is, from the priestly caste, but instead from the aristocracy. An example is the philosopher king Pravahana Jaivali, who even claimed that he was in the possession of knowledge that, quote, had never reached the Brahmins. But now back to our main discussion. The investigations of the Indian philosophers were recorded in the form of debates and teachings in a number of texts called the Upanishads. Upanishad literally means to sit besides, referring to a student sitting next to his teacher. But it also came to mean secret teaching or a secret bond between things, or secret knowledge. The oldest of these texts are the Brihat Aranyaka or Great Forest Upanishad, and also the Chandogya or Poetic Rhythm Upanishad. and they are either from the 7th or the 6th century BC, most likely from pre-Buddhism. And already these early texts reveal a very open and inquisitive attitude towards the big questions of life. And this inquisitive attitude is nicely captured in the following lines. These immensely learned householders got together once and began a deep examination of these questions. What is the self, or Atman, and what is the essence of the universe, or Brahman? These debates, we read, were often sponsored by wealthy patrons who held competitions rewarding the philosopher who had the best answers with cows, the most valued commodity of the day. For instance, we read, "We'll give you 1,000 cows for such a speech." As we shall see, the participants of these debates usually start out giving naive answers to the question at hand. And then a superior philosopher gives a much deeper answer that impresses the participants. And this answer is then seen as the correct answer, the truth. One of the greatest achievements of these forest philosophers was their discovery of what we today call the unconscious, which is that mental space inside of us from which our thoughts and feelings arise. Well, how did they achieve this, you might ask? Well, in their text, we often read that they were interested in describing the capabilities of the soul, which to them included breathing, speech, sight, hearing, and thinking. 5 capabilities. And the next step was then to figure out if any of these functions can be identified as the self, or Atman. And this word Atman originally meant breath of life. But around this time got this new meaning of self, or soul, the essence of a human being. They then studied these functions one by one, but each time they discovered they were not equal to the self. We read, "This self of yours, who is present within, but is different from breath, whom breath does not know, and who controls the breath from within, he is the inner controller of the breath." That is, the self is not equal to the breath, but to that inner controller inside of us that controls the breath. And we continue, "This self of yours who is present within, but is different from speech, and in later paragraphs, different from sight, different from hearing, and different from mind, whom the mind does not know, and who controls the mind from within. He is the inner controller of the mind." So the self was the source of all these functions. It is the thinker behind the scenes who produces our thoughts and feelings, etc. But there was a problem. We human beings are only conscious of what can be described in terms of sensory data, that is, our thoughts and feelings. But since the source of these thoughts and feelings is not itself a thought, we can by definition not be aware of it. It is literally beyond the senses, and therefore it also can't be put into words. Or as we read in the Kina Upanishad, "There the eyes goes not, speech goes not, nor the mind." So they concluded, all we can definitely say about Atman, about the self, is what it is not. We famously read, "About this Atman one can only say that it is not this and that it is not that, neti neti. Not this, not that. The self is not our breathing, not our speech, not our sight, not our hearing, and not our thoughts." Or as the sage Yajnavalkya concluded, "We cannot see the seer who does the seeing. We cannot hear the hearer who does the hearing. We can think of the thinker who does the thinking. And we can't perceive the perceiver who does the perceiving." And then he explained, "The one who is aware, let me say this, that is Atman. The faculty of speech enables him to speak. And the one who is aware, let me listen to this, that is Atman. The faculty of hearing enables him to hear. And the one who is aware, let me think about this, that is Atman. The mind is his divine faculty of sight." And then the forest philosophers pushed their argument even further. Since Atman cannot be described, it must be a reality without properties, for properties can be described. And since something without properties also cannot change, it followed that this reality must be eternal. And consequently, an immortal reality must exist within each of us. And it is for this reason that we read that the self, quote, is the one who is beyond hunger and thirst, sorrow and delusion, old age and death. And we also read, the self sees but can't be seen. He hears but can be heard. He thinks but can be thought of. He perceives but can't be perceived. It is this self of yours who is the inner controller, the immortal, and all besides this is grief. And discovering this ultimate reality within became the principal goal of Eastern philosophy. The interest in this mystery of the self was so all-consuming for the Indian forest philosophers that they even gave it cosmic significance. As we will see in the next lecture, it caused them to identify the Atman or self with the essence of the universe itself or Brahman. For both Atman and Brahman were deemed equally unknowable and immortal, and therefore they were considered the same mystery, and therefore they had to be equal. And this is presented as the most important conclusion in the Upanishads. But more on this in the next lecture. Another radical conclusion directly followed from their identification of Atman with Brahman, the essence of the universe. For since the gods also have a self, they must be subject to the same reality as us mortals. Just like the gods, they believed, we also have that sacred Atman inside of us, that is equal to Brahman. So what then do we need the gods for, they asked. And as a result, the gods came to play an inferior role to Atman. For instance, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad we read, if a person knows I am Brahman, he becomes the whole world, and not even the gods can prevent him from becoming thus. For he becomes their very self. So when a man venerates another god thinking, he is one and I am another, he does not understand. And we then read, the gods are not pleased at the prospect of men coming to understand this. Very interesting lines. Or in the words of the sage Yajnavalkya, may the gods forsake anyone who considers the gods to reside in anything other than the self. As the self is the universe, the gods and all things must be inside of us. A unique Indian thought. And also, this very self is the Lord and King of all beings. As all the spokes are fastened to the hub and rim of a wheel, so to oneself are fastened all beings, all the gods, all the worlds, all the breaths, and all the bodies. And in one story we even read that the warrior god Indra, the most mentioned god in the Rig Veda, the earliest Hindu text, was easily defeated by Brahman. And as a result, Indra decided to lay down his weapons to also become a renouncer. For Indra had learned that he had attained those victories that gave him much pride, not by his own power, but only through the power of Brahman. And thus unfolded the teachings of the self in the oldest Upanishads. In the next lecture we'll describe how the forest philosophers developed the notion that the self Atman and the universe Brahman are one. This discovery is now often associated with a deep state of meditation in which one's sense of self loosens and one feels at one with the universe, a state of mind that is now confirmed in MRI research. Yet the Upanishads were written before the invention of meditation. So how did they get to this conclusion? I've studied the Upanishads intensely to find the answer. So stay tuned for the next lecture. And for now, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to know more about Indian philosophy, or any other topic from world history, then read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.